Whether you've got leadership responsibility or not, each and every one of us need to be able to create a group of people around us that won't let us fail. There is an ecosystem around you that makes you successful. There's referral partners, there's co-creators, there's individuals. Our prospects and clients should be a part of our team. The most important attribute of a high-performing team is a lot of candor and transparency. No conflict avoidance, no meeting after the meeting, no private DMing behind each other's backs. How does the group of people that you work with, whether they report to you or not, how does that group of individual transform for 10x outcomes?
Well, the top of the morning to you, and welcome to It's a Good Life. I'm your host, Brian Buffini, and today we have a very special guest. I've been a fan of this man for a long time, promoted his book, Never Eat Alone, for years, and now got a chance to meet him. And what a thrill we have for you today. Keith Ferrazzi is a New York Times bestselling author. He's a leadership expert. He's a coach to Fortune 500 companies, startups, and God bless him, even governments. Keith leads the Greenlight Research Institute, and he's here today to talk about the big shift from leadership to teamship. And we're so excited to dive into this. Any of you out there today have any leadership responsibilities at all, you're going to have some great insight. Keith, welcome to the show. It's great to meet you in person after all these years.
Brian, thanks so much. And thanks for all your support all those years.
Yep. We know a lot of people in common, and the good people always do. Never Eat Alone was just a phenomenal book and a phenomenal principle with great depth to it. And now you've done it on the leadership side. And there's millions of leadership books, not thousands. And it seems like every time I'm booking people for speakers, everybody's a leadership expert, even people who've never led anything. But the authenticity of what you have and what you've done and the experiences you have make Never Lead Alone very unique. So many of our listeners are very familiar with Never Eat Alone. What led you to write Never Lead Alone?
Well, first of all, for those of you who are still hanging in, whether you've got leadership responsibility or not, I think this book is really important for you, because what we're really talking about is how each and every one of us need to be able to create a group of people around us that won't let us fail. And whether you're an individual real estate executive or a financial services representative, whatever you happen to be, and you may not have a bunch of people reporting to you, there is an ecosystem around you that makes you successful. There's referral partners, there's co-creators, there's individuals that, even if you think about it, our prospects and clients should be a part of our team. So what I want to start talking to you about is, what is the social contract? And I use social contract. What's the set of agreements that we have with the people that we're working with? And typically the relationships and the attributes of those relationships, unfortunately, I have found to be fairly mediocre. Now, if you go back to Never Eat Alone, I was trying to help you for 20 years now, bring the most important people into your life that will open doors of opportunity and prosperity for you. And that's what Never Eat Alone was focused on. It was focused on your network. And now there was a little hint at the time to how those relationships needed to function authentically, generously. But what I wanted to lean into, and what I've done for 20 years now, you're a world-renowned coaching organization. What we do is we have a very specific niche. We only coach teams. So we coach any team that's in the act of transformation, trying to go to the next level. And right now, with AI, we all should be, by the way. And so the question is, how does the group of people that you work with, whether they report to you or not, how does that group of individual transform for 10x outcomes? And that's the basics of the book. It's really a journey from Never Eat Alone to Never Lead Alone. And just one other thing, when I first started my coaching firm, I was coaching in the sales and marketing arena. As you may remember, I was chief marketing officer at Deloitte, chief marketing officer at Starwood Hotels, and I saw the good and the bad. I saw Deloitte, a band of brothers and sisters trying to take a hill together, wrestling ideas around the world. And then I saw at Starwood a very competitive group of individuals working in functional silos. And what I experienced there was the winning of Deloitte, which is now one of the top consultancies in the world, from where we were in the lowest of the big 8, to now at Starwood, we had to sell to Marriott. And that juxtaposition really got me studying this subject about 20 years ago.
Brilliant. Well, let's dive in specifically. So, when you coin a new term, you got to define a new term. So, everybody's leadership. You have teamship.
Yeah.
Talk about what it is and why it's important.
Well, let me do it in a way that's a little prescriptive for our listeners here. Any of you should be asking the question, first and foremost, who's my team? Who's my team? And every chapter of the book, it talks about 10 shifts from leadership to teamship,
Right.
10 shifts from having the burden on your shoulders alone to leaning on a group of individuals that will make sure that you are stress tested and won't fail. And there's a relationship among that group of individuals that I call co-elevating. A group of folks that are, while they're collaborating, trying to achieve some mission, they're also pushing each other higher. So the first question I ask you is, who's your team? The other day I was on a podcast and there was a gentleman who had just started a coaching practice. And, by the end of the call, I had put him in touch with the CEO at Ferrazzi Greenlight, thinking that the two of them could be peer coaches of each other because my CEO is relatively new. They're now teammates.
Right.
And you don't have to pay somebody to be your teammate.
Right.
And that's probably one of the most important things to think about, which is who is that group of individuals that collectively are going to help each other achieve greatness? And that's your team, first and foremost. Second thing is, how do you treat that group of individuals? And the point that I would make is the most important attribute of a high-performing team is a lot of candor and transparency. No conflict avoidance, no meeting after the meeting, no private DMing behind each other's backs. On a scale of 0 to 5, the average group of people working together are in the high 1s or the low 2s in terms of their transparency, candor, truthfulness. That's unacceptable. We've got to have the courage of fully putting everything on the table. Right. Now, the way the book works in a chapter like that, that's chapter 3, moving from conflict avoidance to candor. We recognize how important it is. There's a hero story of somebody who's doing incredibly well. And then there's some simple practices. And one of the things we learn is that if you have a meeting with a group of people, the likelihood that you'll get full truth from that group of people is actually quite low. If, on the other hand, you say in advance of a meeting, hey, we're going to address this issue, lagging sales, marketing's not quite working, whatever it is, I would like all of you in a document, which we can all see each other's document, like a Google Doc or something. I want all of you to go in there and I want you to write, what do you think the real problem is we're trying to solve? And what is a bold solution to solve it? People who are given an assignment like that before showing up in the meeting have an 85% increase in what's called psychological safety, willingness to be courageous, willingness to be candid. And so literally just meeting shifting and asking people a question before they show up in a room gives you more of that candor. That's just one of the practices, but there are 3 or 4 practices in that chapter, just like there is in every other chapter. And each one makes up a new social contract for how you're currently working with people today.
Well, it's great stuff. And when you talk about that co-elevation, we deal in a world today that's very isolated.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges, we have a lot of self-employed people who are our audience. And the downside to self-employed is we've got to take the self out of it. Yeah. And unconsciously what you did, and this is where I think it's part of where I came from to build my network, is you're a connector by nature. Yeah. Right? You took your CEO and this other individual and put them together. And so there's 2 different parts to this that I see in the co-elevation side, which is on one hand, you got to be looking to connect people. Like you need to talk to that person. And that in itself is one of the biggest values, I think, in the marketplace today. And then secondly, people have become isolated. We have hundreds and hundreds of employees. 5 years ago, everybody was based here in Carlsbad and San Diego. Today, 40% of my employees live out of state.
Yeah.
It was, and so you talk about silos and Zoom calls and all this kind of stuff. And, we are very intentional in how we connect and interact, and that whole dynamic of co-elevation. I know we can touch on the 10 shifts from leadership to teamsmanship. And again, I saw that in the book. But one of the things I saw before we get into that was these red flag rules. Yeah. And I thought that was great stuff. So maybe we could touch on those, what the red flag rules are that you see that kind of stop this shift from leadership to teamsmanship taking place.
So a red flag rule is, again, the book is grounded in 10 things that you should be doing differently with your team that most teams aren't doing, which makes them mediocre. And a lot of it is that most teams are hub and spoke to the individual. As you suggested, most leaders are feeling very isolated, and they feel like the burden's all on them. I'm trying to get individuals to ask the team to step up and meet them in leadership, right? Now, before we go there, and the red flag rules are important because every chapter has a red flag rule that is sort of the agreement. We are going to be courageous in our dialogue with each other. That's a red flag rule. And every once in a while, you should pause and use the diagnostic that's in the book and assess, are we doing that? Are we speaking courageously when it's risky with each other? Most teams are not, right? So the red flag rules are your guidepost through the 10 shifts. You mentioned two things I wanted to comment on. One is, now that you're more virtual than you ever were before, it's so important that we are much more purposeful in how we build relationships. It's one of the chapters, it's actually chapter 4, which is moving from accidental relationships, serendipitous walking down a hallway, etc., to very purposeful relationships. There's a wonderful exercise that I call an energy check, and I observed it in a lot of teams during the pandemic. Remember, during the pandemic, we would show up in a meeting, and the first thing we would do is we'd stop and say, is everybody okay? Right? Is everybody okay? We've stopped that, right? The ability, while you're virtual, to literally level set and do a personal energy check at the beginning of a meeting, and just ask everybody you're working with, and this is a beautiful thing to do with your clients and et cetera. Just say, hey, on a scale of 0 to 5, where's your energy these days, and what's bringing it down? With an understanding that when everybody hears that, we're all going to then take it to the next step and says, how can I help? So you mentioned that as well, which is, you talk about showing up with a client or showing up with somebody and making connections. I always say that with every relationship that we have, we've got to be leading with what I call 5 packets of generosity. You know, like before I show up meeting somebody new, I've imagined 5 things I can do for them, only 2 of which is me selling them something. Obviously, what you do for a living is beneficial to somebody, and it's a packet of generosity. But I want to see at least 3 things. Like, I will work my butt off in a call to make sure that I've made an introduction to them every single call. It's like, what's going on with your life? What are you looking for? Even if it's something like charities they're working on or something they're interested in learning from, et cetera, So making sure that you're leading with generosity among that team, making sure that you're very purposeful in the relationships with that team are really critical shifts. And the point is, this stuff isn't difficult when you turn it into simple practices. I don't like airy-fairy conceptual books. Everything in my book is, here's a shift you need to make. Here's a couple practices to use to get there.
Let's talk about the shifts. Let's dive in, and maybe we'll give folks an overview of the 10, and then maybe you could pick 1 or 2 of your favorites. I'm asking you to pick your favorite kids.
Yeah.
Maybe give folks an overview of the 10 shifts, and then we can dive into 1 or 2 of them.
Yeah, I'll even pull out my little book here.
Yeah, right. I got mine here.
Just to guide along as we go.
Yeah.
So look, and I'll walk you through. The chapters are organized very purposefully.
Yep.
As what I think are the most important ones first. The first couple of chapters, the first chapter gives you a little backstory. It's the journey from never eat alone to never to lead alone. And it sets the importance for how we really don't expect as much from our teams as we need to. It also redefines team. Chapter 1 makes us realize our team are those we choose to work with to achieve some great ends. And it doesn't have to mean that you've got a reporting relationship. During the pandemic, I got to know Tony Robbins a lot better.
Sure.
I got to know another buddy of mine down here in Southern California who I was with last night, Peter Diamandis, who writes a lot about abundance and future technologies. And they became a part of my team. We joined each other's boards. We had weekly phone calls that we were sort of chatting with investments we were making, et cetera. I can't afford those guys in my organization.
Right.
But I can't afford them on my team.
Right.
So that's the distinction. Chapter 1. Chapter 2, I lay out how to use the book. But let's dive in. Chapter 3, I want to teach everybody, stop being conflict avoidant. You got to have candor. You got to have transparency. Right. And I'll give you some of those practices. Then we get into building those purposeful relationships, not just through serendipity, but we need to land those relationships. And we already talked about a couple things: leading with generosity, being more more purposeful and on intimacy with those individuals, and really building deep, loyal relationships, not acquaintances. Then we start looking at this idea, I call it energy. And resilience of a team is so powerful.
Right.
Making sure that your team has strong energy and making sure that not just you as a leader are running around playing whack-a-mole, responsible for everybody staying hard on their energy, but I want to make sure that the team has each other's back. Now, this is the shift. Leaders are in the middle, and it's like a maypole and everybody dancing around them, and you're giving direction, you're giving feedback. I want to get to the stage where everybody's got each other's back. And the team lifts up and is responsible for each other. That is a bigger burden than a typical team has. Most teams are looking up and waiting for the leader to lead, and that's just not acceptable. So, the next piece we talk about is how do you really elevate collaboration? And this is a big one because, I was talking to you about if you have a meeting and we think of meetings as the primary form of our collaboration, we're going to be limited to the number of people that function well in a meeting and the people who would actually spend the time in a meeting. But on the other hand, if we start using the available documents and technologies that we have today, like Microsoft Teams and Google Docs and Zoom and all of these things, not just for meetings, but to actually collaborate.
Right.
We can be asking dozens of people, including clients, to get involved with ideation with us, to get involved in creative thinking with us.
Right.
And they can do it in 5-minute increments using surveys and other things that don't require meetings as the primary form of collaboration. We waste so much damn time in meetings.
Right. Death by meeting, right? That's the deal.
Exactly. So the book keeps moving through that. We talk a lot about Agile. So Agile is a word that shouldn't be intimidating. It's not just for software engineers.
Yeah.
Agile is a word that we should all be working on. One of the recommendations I have for sales organizations or even salespeople is you should be working on monthly Agile sprints. What am I going to achieve this month? And then you bust your butt to achieve it. But at the end of every month, or even you could do it at the end of every week,
Right.
you pause with the people you're working with and say, what have we achieved? Where have we struggled?
Right.
What didn't work? What do we need to change in the next week or the next month?
Me personally, this is one of my favorites. I picked off the book right away because, I'm an innovative entrepreneur. I've built this 30-year organization. And again, you need, there was a book I read years ago called Barbarians and Bureaucrats, right? It was an excellent book. I don't know if you ever saw that. But it's basically, you need the barbarian to go create the business and you need the bureaucrats to go build the systems, right? The problem is, as an entrepreneur and still a barbarian after all these years, I can bring the fear of God into people because they see change, right?
Yeah.
And then, oh my God. And I just, I have my system. People find their identity in their job. They find their identity in the routine. But I'll tell people all the time, like, congratulations, we're making great buggy whips, but Ford is pumping out, Model A's or Model T's. And where are we at? So this word agile, I've started to use in my meetings with people because it's something people aspire to. Like, I like the idea of being agile. People like the idea of being agile. They hate the concept of change or, change imposed is change opposed.
Yeah.
And I just think, like, the way I've translated this for my team is being agile is like being fit. It's like being flexible, and if you're stiff, you're not able to move. And the world we live in today, like, I'm going to say this, like, we just started using, we just did our first Kickstart broadcast. So I've done 2,500 seminars all over the world, big conferences, so on and so forth. And now we just found the #1 virtual location in Vegas. And I've been able to reach tens of thousands of people in this interactive way. Blew my mind, blew their mind, where the same principles, but a different function. AI is upon us. I mean, it's changing everything. It's changing the book world. It's changing anything where content's involved. And so I think that word agile is a huge one to me, because to me, it's like being flexible, and you got to be agile as opposed to change.
The simple direction I'd give your listeners are just pause for a moment and say, what is it that I'm going to try to achieve in this upcoming week? And write it down. And then go try to do it. And then at the end, sit with anybody who you partner with, your team, yourself, your spouse, whatever, and say, okay, what did we really achieve versus what we tried to? What did we learn? Where do we struggle? and how are we going to adapt and change for the next week?
Right.
If you just keep doing that, you'll never miss your target.
Right.
Problem is when we just put our head down and just keep working the same old way, we wake up and we've totally missed our targets. So agility is really important.
Yeah, I love it.
And then just the last couple, chapter 9 of the book, I started talking about how do you get everyone's voice heard? A lot of people feel like the more people you get involved in ideation and collaboration, the slower the pace is and the more consensus oriented it is. I couldn't, for what I've seen in the most successful teams who are highly courageous and candid, is they hear what everybody around is saying. They want to hear. They don't have to agree with it. Too often entrepreneurs don't want to hear opposing points of view. They shut them down because of their own strong voice. We need to make sure that we're resounding in being much more inclusive, much more, I call it teaming out, asking more people their opinion. Now, the good news is you don't have to do anything with it. It's up to you, right? But you need to be faced with differencing and diverse opinions. And then we start getting into a little bit of, now is this team you're working with your coach. What I love about my friendship with Peter is he's my most butt-kicking accountability buddy. He's the person that tells me like it is all the time. We all need that. And often, again, too many times leaders put themselves up on a pedestal and they don't realize that every year you better be leveling up by 30% in your capabilities, your competencies, your technology, your leadership. Constant growth. So, and that's, those are the 10 shifts. And, of course, I want to index toward the beginning of the book and really make sure we get some of those landed and some of those simple practices landed. But if you follow this, I made it so small is that I wanted it to be a simple workbook for you to just pick and choose and eat like popcorn the various practices.
Yeah, well, I love that about it. And again, in the world we live in today, having to be able to go through and read and, I tear them up and highlight and I'm still old school like that. One of the things I look at this in the world of where we've been as leaders and where we're going, I think it's very pertinent to where we're at. Let me ask you this, because one of the things I just want to touch on technically, and then I'm going to ask you to kind of finish up here with kind of where someone could start this process. But one of the things you talk about in the world today is this asynchronous collaboration. The across the board, and I'm on boards of companies. I serve major, Fortune 5 companies that are partners and sponsors of ours. And with the work from home and all that kind of good stuff, one of the things we see is that collaboration is at an all-time low. And again, it's just, whether it's hanging out at the water cooler, we're just physically being together, people, and then people are so caught up in production. We're effective, we're efficient, but we're not necessarily effective. Where does this collaboration come from, and what are your insights on that right now?
Well, it is critical because all of our metrics. So we've been doing this for 20 years, coaching teams, and all of our metrics showed a steady state of the average team. And of course, what we find is when you implement these practices, all of your outcomes radically improve on team effectiveness. But for those who are just steady state, we saw a real dip in team collaboration, team bonding, et cetera. All of those things went down during the pandemic when you went virtual. But it was interesting. People who put an engineering mindset to their work and said, okay, I'm not going to accept the fact that collaboration's at an all-time low. How do I 10x it? Not just make it as good. How do I 10x it? How do I use technologies? How do we collaborate outside of meetings, but in documents? And we start shifting collaboration more intentionally using the tools that are available to us. Everybody has them on their computers. What you start to find, and this is all embedded in chapter 6, what you start to find is your collaboration goes up significantly. And you don't even have to be in the same office to do it. As soon as an organization gets global, like yours is, you start to realize you've always been a hybrid organization. As soon as you get 2 buildings on your campus, you realize
that's true.
You're a hybrid organization. So we've got to get better at being intentional. And it was, I reflected when I looked at the book and I went through all the leaders that inspired me and were hero stories of the book. many of them were engineers, not guys like you and me, Brian, who came from sales and marketing.
Yeah.
But there were people who had an engineering mindset who said, I'm not satisfied with the way my organization's productivity is working, that operational excellence. I'm going to re-engineer work. And when they started re-engineering work, they got disproportionately better outcomes. And so I captured that. And, for those of us who are sales and marketing people, this book is an engineering mindset around how do you redo work.
None of us is as smart as all of us. That's all I know.
Amen.
Keith, as we finish up here, obviously the book is fabulous. I recommend it highly. Never Lead Alone. And I know thousands of our folks will run out and get it right away. One of the things we do as we finish up, Keith, we like to get to know our guests a little better. We've asked a series of little questions. We've been doing this for years and years and years. And whether they're movie stars or rock stars or business stars, it's kind of a fun thing. So just as we finish up here, I'm going to throw you just a few pop quiz stuff, and folks will get to see Keith in a little different light. So number one, what's the single best piece of advice you've ever been given?
It's interesting. You can't get there alone. It really is the basis of my life's work. You can't get there alone. Learn how to enlist the people around you to level yourself up.
Nice. Who gave you that?
It was originally it was a gentleman named Pat Leconto. Okay. He was the CEO of Deloitte when I was just a kid.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Great. So you got a mentor when you were young. That's good to have, right? Yeah. What one talent or gift do you wish you possessed that you currently don't?
I really do wish I was much better at disciplined project management. Everything these days turns into a set of initiatives. And I tend to dive into things, start action, and expect that everybody knows where I am and will catch up. And it's not the easiest thing for a team to follow me in that regard, which is why I've got a new president and CEO working in the company.
Good for you. And my whole team is going, see, Brian, see, that's exactly how we feel. Yeah. Great. What book has been most instrumental in your life?
I'll go way back old school. How to Win Friends and Influence People. Dale Carnegie. Great old book.
Years ago when we had our house burned down, and I had, between my wife and I, we had over 500 books. And when we rebuilt our new home, we built 2 huge libraries. And one of the great things was, okay, what's the very first book that I'm going to go and buy to put back on my shelf? And I went and got an original copy, signed copy of How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I'd read it dozens of times, but I actually had the pleasure of, where do I start? And that was the very first one. To me, that was the foundation of what became the personal growth and development movement. So that's cool that you're on that journey, and I certainly am a big fan there. Let me ask you this. What one movie, you're scrolling through the channel, you don't have much time, but there's one movie, every time it's on, you stop and watch even part of it. What's the one that gets you every time?
Caddyshack.
Have not had that one before.
Caddyshack. I was a caddy growing up in Pittsburgh. My old man was an unemployed steelworker. My mom was a cleaning lady. I had to go work at the local country club. And Bill Murray and Caddyshack always just makes me smile.
That's great. Great. And see, there's another side to the great Keith Ferrazzi. We know all your accomplishments and whatever else, but again, everybody comes from somewhere. Yeah. My wife's family's all from Pittsburgh, and you started out as a caddy, so great stuff. I play at La Costa here with a bunch of guys, and I every single weekend we play, somebody mentions a line from that movie. It's just impossible not to, right?
Exactly.
Great stuff. Okay. Last but not least, Keith Ferrazzi, what does the good life mean to you?
Being in love and having your family around you.
Yep.
And ideally being healthy in that process. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good stuff. Well, let me say this. Speaking of love, I love your book. Never Eat Alone is a book. I lived that life, and then I read that book and I went, oh, this is why this works. And then it also helped me do that, which I built my business on, intentionally. And I think with Never Lead Alone, I think you're on the cusp, on the front end of what's taking place as a transformation in organizations and with people and with individuals. Like how to create teams from peers, how to create teams from accountability partners, coaches, and then also the people that we have a chance to influence. And the book's Never Lead Alone, 10 Shifts from Leadership to Teamship. I think it'll have the same impact that Never Eat Alone did. Congratulations to you, Keith. And thanks for being part of our program today. It's been great to get to know you.
Brian, this has been a blessing. It's been great to get to know you. You said something at the very beginning. I know we've already concluded, but I want to bring something up. I was looking forward to your mother's blessing from Ireland.
Well, here it comes. With that said, here she comes all the way from Dublin, 94 years of age, the first leader I got to meet in my life. Her name's Therese Buffini, and she's going to finish us off today. Keith, there you go. Thanks for joining us.
May the road rise up to meet you, and may the wind always be at your back. May the rain fall soft upon your fields, and the sun shine warm upon your face. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the hollow of his hand. See you next time.